Hi, I can't tell if there's anybody out there, but I'm going to assume that there is, and it's 2 o'clock. So welcome everyone to the first of our What's Possible bite-sized sessions. For any of you that don't know the specialist works, we are a solution provider to growth marketers, and we've been running the What's Possible conference for a few years now, and because of enforced circumstances, we've taken the decision not to do the live conference this year, but to start to bring the same essence to this bite-sized format. So thanks for being on the first one. What's Possible is all about, and always has been about, actionable innovation. So it's the antithesis of fluff and guff, and it's all about actionable but new things that you can bring into your repertoire that are going to make a difference to your bottom line. And I think there's never been a time when that's more valuable than now. Essentially, what we find when we're talking to all of our clients is that people are asking two very pertinent questions. What's going on out there, and what can I do about it? And that's very much what What's Possible is about. So thank you for joining. We hope that this is going to be the most valuable 45 minutes of your week, and we will be delighted if you took something actionable out of this session. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Mark, who's our Client Success Director. He'll be your host and will introduce today's speakers from Craft Media. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin, and welcome everybody. I'm going to be your host this afternoon, as Martin said. And I'd like to welcome, we've got over 100 people from Europe, the UK and the States joining us today for this session. In terms of quick admin for everybody, just want you all to know that you will all be on mute. But if you do want to ask any questions, there is a chat box option, which we'll be monitoring through the session. And we do encourage you to ask questions. So please use that, and you get to as many as we can at the end of the session as time will allow. The deck will be available from Craft, who will provide contact details at the end of the session. And so just to introduce our first session today, which is how to build brand trust with speed and confidence, we've got Sally Weavers and Jen Smith, the co-founders of Craft. And Craft is the go-to boutique media strategy consultancy for brands and creative agencies. And this particular session has been curated to give an executive summary of their strategic insights on how to fast-track brands to a position of trust. So, Sally and Jen, over to you.
Hello. Slides. I need to see some slides, I think.
So Sally, if you click on the Present tab just on the right-hand side.
Got it.
Okay.
Here we go. Guys, thanks to the Specialist Works for asking us to kick off this series of What's Possible and for being their technology guinea pigs. Anyone who knows Jen and I will know that this is a disaster, a recipe for disaster. We're classic strategists. Clicking the right button at the right time really isn't in our skill set. But we'll really try not to cock this up for you. So as Mark said, we've been interested in the subject of trust and how brands build trust through comms in its broadest sense for some time. And towards the end of last year, we completed an analysis into the different levers that the most trusted brands use to create that sort of really brilliant platform for being trusted. And we've created a type of blueprint that brands can follow specifically if they were trying to launch into a category where trust is paramount. And we thought that we had every angle covered, but then COVID happened and we could see another dimension emerging that impacted our work. So over the next 20 minutes or so, we're going to give you an introduction to the work we completed last year outlining the principles that brands should follow if they are in the business of building trust quickly, and then an update on the impact COVID has had on our thinking. And so you should leave here with a view on the areas where you are currently strong, because most brands are already doing some of this, and the areas where you could perhaps adjust your thinking. Trust is a blend of three things. Historically, brands originated as symbols of trust. They acted as a kind of guarantee that the product or service carrying the brand label would consistently deliver quality amidst its reputation. So, for example, in the 1800s, a bag of branded flour promised to be flour and not sawdust. I was telling Jen earlier, I'm absolutely convinced that I bought sawdust recently, as my homemade bread was not what it should have been. So I'm blaming the flour. There are three basic elements of trust that need to be fulfilled. The first is about competence, so that you have the ability to do what you say you'll do. The second is around dependability, so you can be relied upon to do what you say you'll do. And the third one is about integrity, so that what you do will be fair and just. And since then, brands have learned that investing in advertising, particularly big, expensive brand advertising, is an effective measure of signalling trustworthy status. Lovely Rory Sutherland termed it reputational skin in the game, which acts as a commitment device and creates. And his view is that the more a brand is perceived to invest in its reputation, the more it has to lose from under-delivering. Jen, can't hear you, mate. This is what happens. You're on mute.
Unmute.
That's it.
Can you hear me now?
I told you it was a disaster.
Oh, it's like every meme on the internet. The problem with increasing accessibility to advertising is that we're seeing trust as a value is becoming a rare commodity. Once upon a time, getting thousands or millions or even just hundreds of you lots to know who you were or what you did required you to be good, lucky, well-connected, or to have deep pockets to buy that fame. Because it was hard, if you were noticed, trust flowed as a result of that hard work. Today, getting in front of thousands of people can be incredibly cheap. So therefore, eyeballs are no longer an element that can set you apart. Instead, it's keeping people's attention that's the hard thing. And that hard thing is also how you build trust. Corporations are also not helping themselves at the same time. Scandals, shady business have all helped fuel the crisis in trust. Essentially, people just don't know who to trust anymore. Edelman, who are the arbiter of trust, have shown us consistently that trust is declining across every sector. Government trust is in utter freefall, and trust in brands is at an all-time low.
And yet, you could also argue that today people are way more trusting than they've ever been. We will regularly get into cars with strangers with Uber. We're very happy to invite unknown families into our homes and then go and stay at theirs, so with Airbnb. And we will regularly book holidays based on the recommendation of a person, and quite often and regularly a bot who we've never met through TripAdvisor. There's a social proof that's baked into these network communities, and this is at the heart of these businesses, and it's critical for their success. As a society, our growing ease with trusting strangers is creating this people-powered marketplace, and it's directly responsible for the growth of the sharing economy. PricewaterhouseCoopers estimate that the sharing economy will be worth £140 billion by 2025. And so we would argue that rather than being in crisis, trust is simply transformed in line with the way that people are now interacting with brands and consuming media. And just because it isn't where it used to be, it doesn't mean that trust has gone away. In fact, trust has become more human, quite less linear in a way. We think that trust has changed in three different ways. The first is that trust is distributed, and it's distributed in a way that is transparent, inclusive, and instead of feeling imposed from the sort of top down, it sort of grows up from grassroots. And we see this through the rise of very familiar brands like Airbnb, Uber, Tinder. Even the emergence of things like cryptocurrencies and the importance of reviews on Amazon and TripAdvisor that can genuinely make or break a business. Rachel Botsman, in her book, Who Do You Trust? There's a great quote I'm going to read to you. It says, instead of flowing upwards to institution, experts, authorities and regulators, trust now flows horizontally to peers, friends, colleagues and fellow users. So that really sums up that idea that trust is distributed. The second way that trust has changed is it's tribal. I trust brands that feel like they share my values. And so the brands I trust won't be the same as those that Jen trusts. Again, there's a lovely quote from The Atlantic that we use quite a lot, which says, the rise in fake news and an increasingly polarized political climate has given rise to a post-truth disease that's come to be known as tribal epistemology, in which the truth or falsity of a statement depends on whether the person making it is deemed one of us or one of them. We come back to talk a little bit more about this sense of are you in my gang or not, because it's become increasingly important. And the final way that trust has changed, and I think the most important for modern brands, is that trust can now be built digitally. So they no longer need a physical presence. They no longer need to invest millions of pounds into building their brand slowly. They can do it quickly using brilliant algorithms that as consumers we place an inordinate amount of faith and trust in. The algorithm really rarely gets it wrong.
So therefore, we think it's essential that as brands, we're building trust differently in the internet age. So because we're nosy, we wanted to know if there were consistent levers that brands in the business of building trust were pulling on that we could learn from. And we think there might be 12 different things that brands are pulling on as levers, and they fall into 4 different buckets. They are, the first one's technology. Technology incorporates innovation, data, and it's how brands are using innovation and how they're baking innovation and data into their business model that's helping them build trust. It means that trust is baked inside as opposed to added on from external communications. The second point is signals. How we are expressing quality, confidence and authenticity and our values. It's connected to classic comms behavior, projecting those signals out, articulating your values and delivering with authenticity is still incredibly important in establishing and maintaining trust. Third is communication. How we're seeing brands become more human, having influence and educating. The humanization of brands, whether they're having friendly names or that cheeky tone of voice, is a huge lever in driving trust, especially those businesses where tech and data play increasing roles. And we're seeing that need for humanization to come out in other ways. The fourth bucket is around people, service and sacrifice, customers and community. How you treat people have been a huge signaler in building trust, the people that work for your organization and those that you interact with. But what we're seeing is that in times of crisis, this could potentially be the most important lever that we can pull on at all. In our longer piece of research, we've looked at each of these influences and these different levers in more detail, and we've demonstrated what it looks like against a number of different businesses, both those we work on and those that we admire. How this is presented is that we love a wheel. Which is great for being a thinky strategist, but it's bloody awful for presenting to you lot on a Zoom call in a global pandemic. However, hopefully what you'll see from this is a taster of what we've been up to. And if you are interested in it, it's something that we'd happily take you through in more detail. Instead, though, we thought, we've given you a taste of what we think is driving trust. What we thought would be quite interesting is to have a quick chat with you about how we think that might be changing, how trust is changing in terms of during a global pandemic.
Okay, so we went through the 3 core elements of trust. So you've got the ability to do what you say you're going to do, you can be relied upon to do it, and you'll do it in a way that's fair and just. The global pandemic has kind of, we can start seeing a 4th element come through, and that's focus of motivation. So that idea that you prioritise action over talk whilst doing the right thing. Oops. This now matters way more in a crisis than it ever did before, because a crisis means that everything becomes much more about humanity. Brands were already becoming more human, and this has been accelerated amid COVID-19. When we're talking about individuals as opposed to businesses and brands, sociologists refer to this as the theory of self-orientation, and this refers to the person's focus. So, in particular, whether the person's focus is primarily on him or herself or on the other person. So it taps into that sense of tribalism that I mentioned earlier. You might find yourself saying things like, I can't trust him on this deal. I don't think he cares enough about me. He's focused on what he gets out of it. It's much more emotional and feeling led. And self-orientation is quickly becoming the element that governs a brand or a person's overall score of trustworthiness. We love a formula as well. So credibility, reliability, and integrity or intimacy will give a good base. But do we believe the brand or person in question? And that's really the kicker.
In fact, what we're seeing is that research by the Edelman Trust Barometer demonstrates that brands are being held to incredibly high standards by consumers during this crisis, with 74% of respondents agreeing that brands placing profit before people during the crisis will lose my trust forever. What we're seeing is that across that wheel that was hard to read for you lot is that the values we think it is the people segment that's becoming increasingly important. In particular, it's how brands are demonstrating sacrifice and delivering action. It's been said before that a value isn't really a value unless it's costing you money. And this seems to be particularly true in a pandemic. And the brands that we're seeing are doing well at this time are really leaning into the value of sacrifice and delivering their values through actions, not words.
So we've taken a couple of brands that we think have done particularly well during this crisis and overlaid the activity and communications that they've been doing just to basically test our theory, and it stacks up. So this is the wheel for Brewdog. Again, you can't read it, but Brewdog has been in the news a lot since the start of the lockdown, and according to a YouGov survey, their reputation has proved dramatically given their willingness to jump in and help and the speed at which they've pivoted their business. The news story about them creating their hand sanitizer is kind of that fits under the role of sacrifice. So switching their business to a new production line, but they've been really active across every other lever around that wheel. And this has been the thing that's kind of carried them through. A few highlights for me are, things like under values. Brewdog have been super vocal, fighting on behalf of the craft brewing industry, lobbying government, etc. Really, really standing up for the people that they would usually be competitive against. In terms of educate, I love the fact that they very quickly launched an online home brewing masterclass, which is brilliant for people kind of bored at home and wanting to learn a new skill. From the point of service. They've done things like drive-through bars, click and collect, fast-track delivery. So brilliant pivot of their business to make sure that people can still appreciate their brand at home. And finally, be human. I mean, the founder of Brewdog, love him or hate him, is super passionate. And every piece of comms comes directly from him. You can absolutely tell his passion for his business and his passion for his staff and his customers. And I love the fact that he actually, at the beginning of the crisis, sent an emergency call out to all of his equity punk shareholders saying, you have to help us survive. You have to buy more beer and you've got to get your friends to do it as well. And I love the real sort of humanity and honesty about that. Another one that's done super well is Tesco. And I mean, they always do brilliantly, but they've really come out of this with flying colours. I'll just pick out some highlights for me. From a quality point of view, I think that Tesco are very clearly being driven by their commitment to their staff as a priority. They very quickly came out with some sort of, real top safety measures, recruitment and comms. Their confidence comes through in the fact that they've continued to invest in paid media, including out of home, and very nicely switching the messaging on their out of home to point at those kind of key workers that are still out and about. Service and sacrifice, again, this sits again at the heart of their business, and it's focused on their staff. So things like full pay for vulnerable staff, sick pay for isolating staff from day one, and a 10% bonus for all staff as a thank you. They've come across as super authentic. I love the fact, again, that the supermarkets are sort of banding together to create a singular voice and consistent messaging across the market. They're really, really very human in their comms. So their use of staff reinforces that perception that Tesco isn't a bland corporate, but an organisation made up of real people. And finally, educate. So they've invested in very clear comms across broadcast channels to give guidance to and information about how to behave and what to expect when you're in store. So they really have come out of this brilliantly well.
So in summary, what should you take away from this chat? You should take away that trust is made up of three core elements: competence, dependability, and integrity. And what we're seeing during this crisis is actually the arrival and the importance of a fourth, which is your focus of motivation. But trust itself is also becoming a rare commodity. And in fact, on a socio-political level, it is still in crisis. And as trust in institution declines, consumer expectations for brands to do good is actually growing. If you want to consider how you can strengthen trust, follow the Wheel of Trust, hopefully one that you can read. As brands, you'll already be doing a lot of these things, but having a blueprint like this will help you ensure that you don't miss a trick. You won't be able to achieve everything across every lever at every moment, but doing a stock take can help you know where you may need to focus next. By following these frameworks and guidelines, brands can expect to become trusted institutions for the people that they serve. But be warned, as the world changes, trust changes too. So brands must remain actively engaged on building trust in order to retain it.
That's it. That's all we've got for you. We were given 20 minutes and I think we've just about done that, which is brilliant. As we've referenced all the way through this, we've done a really extensive piece of work, which we're super happy to share with anyone if it's of particular interest. So you just need to let us know. You'll even be able to read the slides.
And we'll be able to see your faces.
Website and stuff like that. So yeah. Give us a shout if you need any more.
Well, thank you both very much. I thought that was really, really good. Very, very helpful and insightful, and sticking exactly to your 20 minutes. Very well done. Thank you. We've had quite a few questions come through, so I'll plough through as many as I can. If there are any other questions that people want to ask or statements they want to share, please put in the chat box. So there is quite a few things that's coming through, asking questions about craft. Just a bit of a background about you both, please. If you could just share with everybody, if they may not know craft, just give us a quick background about what your business is and what your philosophy as an organisation is.
Okay, so I'll take this, Jen. We set up Craft 2 years ago. We are a comms strategy consultancy, and we started with the intention of filling the gap between creative and media agencies. So we play nicely. We plug into the planning teams at creative agencies and work with their creative departments to make sure that the needs of businesses that are being picked up by media agencies are sort of well translated, I suppose. So our focus is very much on a kind of a very creative and strategic approach to media. Jen and I both came out of the networks. I've been in the business for 30 years, something like that. Way too many. Jen slightly less because she's much younger. Yeah, we just thought that there's a senior strategic consultancy. We only employ senior strategists, and we get to answers much quicker than most. Mainly because we do really in-depth thought pieces like this on all sorts of different categories that give us really interesting blueprints for behaviour.
Perfect. Thank you very much. One of the questions that's come through is around marketing techniques. So you gave a few examples of some brands that have done really well during the lockdown situation. But how do trust marketing techniques not cross the line in being seen as cynical PR? I think some feedback has been given around the McDonald's arches separating out or the Volkswagen rings being separated out. How do you see the difference? How do brands advertise that without it coming across as cynical PR?
Yeah. Shall I take that?
You take it.
So really that falls in for me in the fourth bucket, which is actions are trumping words right now. Separating a logo is not an action. As we said, that brands, particularly in driving trust, need to be seen at this point in time to be doing something and doing no harm at the same time. Just that's badging. That doesn't have any substantiation to it. So if you're working around the wheel that we took you through, the separation of a logo doesn't tick any of those boxes.
Yeah. It's also, I think you should always ask yourself, is anyone going to give a shit about this? And arguably the McDonald's logo, no one really cares, right? So there's no point doing it. This is a moment in time when everything needs to matter.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. So Mehul from B Gargantian has said, we're seeing increasing dominance of influencer marketing, although this is also increasingly bought. What are your views on influencer marketing?
Oh, with regards to trust is interesting.
Yes. Sorry. Yeah. Yes.
So I think, influence is definitely one of the levers on the wheel. So whether a brand is having influence over other people or taking it from endorsement from other people. I don't hate influencers. Again, with everything, it's always in the execution. Strategically, they have a role to play, particularly when we think about that humanity that's needed to drive trust. I want the connection to be in a tribe that I connect with is often from seeing people that either I want to be like or feel like I am like. Where it all goes tits up is when it's done in a way that doesn't deliver to the values of the brand.
That actually leads nicely on to the next question from Shireen at Canopy. She cites the Brewdog example that you talked about, and they've said, they were late with my delivery, but their customer service was second to none. So helpful and quick responses to emails and a friendly tone too definitely makes me want to use them again. So turning that into a question, I think therefore is, do you think too many brands focus just on the sale and don't focus on after-sale service, which is probably the most important part of trust building?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, it's the whole premise of sort of, all talk and no substance. And Rory Sutherland's written an amazing piece about this. But it's, you would expect brands have to deliver on what they say they're going to deliver. And I think BrewDog, that's a lovely story actually about BrewDog. But they do make sure that if they say they're going to do something, they absolutely do it.
Well, actually, that leads on again. This is the questions coming through are following a very good theme. Andrew from This Is Gravy asks, what would you say is the fastest way to lose trust?
I think to say you're going to do something and then not deliver, for me, that would be an absolute, I would never use the company again. So I think it's reliability for me.
So one of the things that's in the longer piece of research is that you don't lose trust from making mistakes. Actually, what we have seen is that, and there's a chart, and I can't think of what the model that sits behind it, the name of it, but actually making a mistake causes your trust to dip. But if you can rectify that, if you can re-deliver upon it, apologize and re-engage the audience in the right way, what you can actually see is that your top level of trust actually goes higher from where it started. So mistakes can be to your benefit. So you can, from making mistakes and responding to them appropriately, you can actually drive trust even higher. So it's always to do with the behavior that comes off the back of it rather than mistakes happening or errors being made.
Great. Got a question. In your opinion, when brand trust is undermined for some reason, for example, the Volkswagen scandal, how substantial and long-lasting is that damage? Are there different principles these brands should turn to in these situations in order to restore brand trust?
Yeah, you know what? Volkswagen should work their way around our wheel. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a way of responding, as Jen was saying. It's how you tackle that issue head on. What you do as a result of the problem. That's where you'll start to help. Start to rebuild trust, I suppose.
So, following on from that, this is my question, which is saying sorry ever enough on its own if you're just going to mess up your brand trust with your consumer?
No, you don't get very many chances. Sorry is quite an empty word, isn't it?
Yeah, sorry about that.
I think it's a little bit like dating, in that you need to look at the actions that surround it, not just the words that are said to you. In that, there has to be substance in behind it. Never never go home with a man that's just full of all the sweet words. He needs to have some actions with it as well.
That's a life lesson.
That's definitely a life lesson.
Bearing in mind there are just three of us on the screen, I feel that's being very much directed towards me, but I'll take that anyway. Thank you. So here's a question which I think, knowing craft, what you do as an organization, I think is possibly in the sweet spot of a brilliant question. So Mehul asks again, how can fast-growing startups build for trust whilst they themselves are in a testing and learning phase, especially when it comes to finding their brand point of view?
Who wants that?
I can jump in. So actually, there is an advantage with the D2C brands in that they're built on data. So they have access to first-party data that traditional brands just don't have. So you're already, across that wheel, you're already doing well on that top right-hand corner. I think increasingly it's down to tone of voice and the stories that you tell. So what we're seeing in D2C brands is that they're investing an awful lot in content. So much so that you could argue that they are content brands that just happen to sell a product as well. If you think about the investing into magazines, podcasts, video content that goes around it. And for me, getting that tone of voice right, being human, authentic, realistic, they're the ways that those fast moving brands can absolutely help themselves to establish trust while they're building the plane as they're flying it.
Great, thank you. So we've got a question here. Putting the COVID-19 situation aside, how can a new brand, this is linked, I think, to the last one, but I just want to go through the questions as we've got them. Putting COVID-19 aside, how can a new brand build trust to help acquire new customers if they don't have huge budgets to spend? So more about money as opposed to trust.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that what's interesting about our analysis is that not much of it relies on paid media. Most of it is about behaviour and values and your tone of voice. It's about how you treat your staff, etc. So a paid media budget shouldn't be. Trust is not dependent on paid media. It's how you behave as a brand. Yeah, that'd be my point of view.
We've got quite a few coming through regarding people that would like to have a closer look at the deck. D from Parkinson's UK. So, I mean, on the screen now, you can see the email address of Sally and the other contact points. So if people want to get in contact there, you're happy to share the deck, right?
Yeah, really happy to share it. I mean, it's a long read, so we'll share it. We'll have to retransfer it because it's a monster. And then if there's further information or if you want us to jump on a call, we're really happy to do that.
Okay. I'm going to take, thank you for that, but I'm going to take the other part of Dee's comments and turn it into a question. Because what Dee's specifically looking at is the application of brand trust in the third sector. So Dee works at Parkinson's UK. Is that different to other sectors? And if so, what would be the nuances of advertising in the third sector?
Oh, I don't know, is the honest answer.
I don't know either. We have another deck which we might talk to you about, which is about campaigning brands, so brands with purpose. And that's really helpful for charity organisations and how they should sort of line up their different comms channels or the channels that they have available to them and make sure that they're all working to their absolute kind of, the best of their ability. But what I've not done is apply our sort of the campaigning thought to trust, but that might be interesting. We should do that, Jen, whilst we're sitting at home.
With nothing else to do.
This is a two-way street. We're here to help your business as much as you're here to share with the audiences. So, here's a great question. So what should brands who are inundated with extra demand and can't take any more sales at the moment do at this time without losing trust?
Tell people and keep them informed all the way through. Unlike Homebase, I've got to say, who are winding me up at the moment with zero communication about orders. So, I mean, I get that businesses have been completely inundated, but that if you just keep people informed of what's going on, then they won't lose faith. We're all giving a little bit of slack to businesses at the moment.
I also think there's a power in over communicating, is that sometimes we think we've told people, we've delivered, we can often 1+ our communication to the nth degree. I told them once, that should have gone in. I think we're in a challenging time and there are many demands on people's attention right now. I think frequency can actually be your friend. Don't stalk people and stand outside their houses, just to get the point across. But I do think regular communication, consistent communication, can actually be your friend in keeping people on side.
So there's a question about trust and cynicism. Brands such as EE that have given away and the AA, which are giving away free services to key health workers, is that building trust or is that cynical ploy for attention?
I think it might fit in the middle. In that I think it's an attempt to build trust. I I worry right now that those kind of things fit into the, well, of course you should do that bucket. So it's almost not enough to be going through, to be pulling that sacrifice lever. Like, that just feels like, well, obviously you should do that in this situation. It doesn't feel extraordinary. There doesn't seem to be a degree of effort necessarily attached to that. So I think it's falling between two pillars at the moment.
I'd agree that I agree with that. It's neither one thing nor the other. It's not enough.
And that leads, again, these are flowing brilliantly, to a great question from Lizzie from Atlas for Men. How do you convey that you are a company that looks after its staff, is aiding others, acting sacrificially, without appearing to blow your own trumpet?
I think it might come down to who tells that story for you. So it doesn't always have to be the story that you tell about yourself. It can be something that it could be beneficial for it to be overheard by a wider audience, but think about who is the person that relays that message on your behalf. Is it actually you should put your staff in front so that they're telling it? Or is it that your customers should be telling it? Or is it your suppliers that should be telling it? Sometimes advertising can be the wrong way to tell your story in this situation.
Well, we've got another question on that, so I don't know if it's just phrasing it in a different way, but I'll ask it because it's coming through. Any advice for brands that are afraid of being bold when it comes to communicating the actions and building trust? Some brands seem to be very nervous about being torn down by the general public about it going wrong.
Oh, have a bloody good social media team.
Yeah.
Have a really good, consistent tone of voice. You know, having worked through disaster scenarios in different ways. I haven't got an off-the-shelf answer for that, because that is how you do that would depend on what sector you're in, what you were communicating, a million different things. But like practice is what I'd say in this situation. Having a really core team of people that have gone through every scenario, and keeping it human in your response, whatever it is that you're doing, that lever of humanity, I think, is really important. Was it Twining's Tea, the social media stream, Sally, that you and I were chatting about, the guy on Twitter? It was bloody brilliant. It was just, I'm a guy sitting at home on Twitter responding to tweets, and he just came across as, real and human, and just, put a person behind a business.
What 3 things should brands do immediately to improve their trust?
I'm going back onto our lever. Can I do that? No,
that will upset everybody.
I know.
Across the wheel. I think, like, right now for me, it would be, what are your values? Making sure you actually know what the values are that sit at the heart of your brand, and boiling it down to one. So you might have lots on your wall in your office, but what's the one singular thing that you're going to communicate at this time? Think about your tone of voice in terms of how you communicate that, the humanity that maybe needs to be attached to that. And then I do think who tells that message on your behalf is an interesting thing for brands to think about. And what channel? Is it broadcast or is it more intimate?
Perfect. I think I'm conscious of time and I want to make sure we stick to time. So one final question. I don't know how long this is going to take to answer, which is, you mentioned a lot about tribal trust, which is shared values with individuals. How does marketing have to change due to segmentation if you're trying to target different people in different ways?
How does marketing have to change? Okay, so what you're saying is you'll have multiple audiences. Do you have to communicate with them in different ways? Is that what they're asking?
I think that's the question. I think my assumption on the premise of the question is that in a traditional previous world, you would have bought Men 1634 and advertised a blanket there. But if you're doing tribal advertising to build trust, how do you target different segments which are not necessarily based on normal demographics? I think that's probably what it means.
Yeah, we've just done a strategy for a client where we talk about volcanoes and trenches. And the trenches are exactly what this question is talking about, those sort of deep but very separate audiences that require a slightly different approach to content. For example, a slightly different skew on the same sort of central story. So, and I think that the brilliance about modern media is that you can do that. You can isolate audiences and send different content to each one. So, yeah, I'd say that would be a really interesting approach. It's quite a modern way of marketing. So not one broad message to a broad audience, but multiple messages that we test and learn across different audience groups.
Which probably has massive implications as to which media choice you make then. But
yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's always an element of overhearing in media, but I think that you can structure some really interesting comms plans now that we couldn't do 20 years ago.
Perfect. All right. Well, look, as I said, I'm very conscious that we run this to time, and I want to thank you both for a fantastic presentation. I want to thank everybody for joining us today on our first session of the What's Possible Bitesize program that we've got coming up over the next few weeks. And just to remind everybody that our next session is next Wednesday at 2:00 UK time, which will be our Jamie Clifford from the Specialist Works talking about a new age on the connected TV. So we will be in touch with more information about that. But thank you very much indeed for joining us. Appreciate that.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for coming. Bye.